Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people who are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, Interim Chair of the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. With me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the President and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories.
Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Hi, Bobbi. It's good to be back, and I always see it seems these days I'm always back from someplace. So
It's true. You travel a lot, as I do as well. So it's nice to be back in town.
yep.
Um, and you just got back from a meeting on Mayo Clinic Platform, I understand.
Well, so first of all, we're both banking those frequent flyer miles, as they say.
Yeah.
It was a little bit different. It was a platform med conference, and so Mayo Clinic's a sponsor and sort of an organizer.
Mm.
Because the platform is so important to the future of Mayo, and Mayo sees it as important for the future of healthcare. But it really is, the hope of Dr. Fruja is that it will be not a Mayo conference, but a conference on platform transformation in medicine that Mayo plays a key role in getting together.
Yeah, that's a nice description. Well, let's talk about that. And, maybe we could start by talking about what a platform business is, because people hear that term platform and it's used to describe so many different things. But a platform business specifically is this model that facilitates exchanges between two or more interdependent groups. So it could be consumers and providers, it could be patients and physicians, it could be scientists, healthcare organizations, and it could be digital or physical. And I think some of the platforms that our listeners may be familiar with would be, say, marketplace platforms like Amazon and Airbnb, where people have something to sell and then there's people that come to buy. And then this platform just facilitates that exchange. But of course, we're not talking about marketplace platforms, and then there's social media platforms, transportation platforms like Uber, but we're talking health and wellness, healthcare, and medical science. So, do you want to talk about what platform means in that context?
Sure. Well, and I think it is. I mean, spending some time talking about what is a platform and that definition, I think is helpful because it's sometimes difficult for people to wrap their head around, what it means, why would we go this direction in healthcare? And so, the way I think of it, the easiest analogy is, oftentimes when people talk about platform company, the company that's most often cited is Amazon, right?
Yeah.
And so, so it's to step back and think about sort of the history of Amazon, right? So the A to Z and the smiley face is because it started as a bookseller, right?
Hmm.
And so as a
I remember
bookseller,
those days. Yeah.
you walk into a bookstore. That's how we all operated. We would peruse the shelves. If there was something that caught our interest and we knew it was out there, we might go talk at the cashier, and they would look and see that's a pipeline. I want something. I go in there and I buy the book, right? If I'm online now, I still go to that store online. Well, that's what they in the books. Obviously, it's like a library, right? So they started thinking, well, what if we could get, if we don't have it and we don't have it in our warehouse or another store or location, what if we could connect them to a bookstore that does have it, right?
Hmm.
That's really what it came from. It was all kind of around centricity to what a person needed and wanted, and connecting them with the availability to get it, right? That's the fundamental of platform if you step back. Then you think about what are some of the things, and this is something, of course, that Dr. Fruja, as our CEO, is very articulate about. If you start to think about healthcare, what are one of the things some of the things you and I have talked about a lot on this podcast? Getting access to healthcare is a huge issue, right?
Hmm.
Getting access to the different elements and different things that might be beneficial to you, but it's just having to go to an urgency care, having to go to an ER, having to go to a doctor, having to find an available visit. I mean, that's all what in the vernacular of the business is a pipeline, meaning I'm going to hire a doctor so that if, I'm going to hire Bill Morice as a hematopathologist because if someone needs a hematologic diagnosis, he can get to it when he has availability, right? So Dr. Fruja really stepped in and said, healthcare needs to evolve out of these silos and into something that works better for patients. And something you and I have talked about, like a diagnostic ecosystem. Ecosystem's another. That's why when people wonder why that term comes up, it's because a platform is trying to create a system that has a lot of different participants, hence an ecosystem here around healthcare. So I think that's the vision in platform transformation in healthcare, is that the only way we will solve, accessibility to healthcare, rising costs because of things being not ineffectively used or patients ineffectively interacting with healthcare. To your point, wellness. I mean, we spend so much time thinking about intervention. How do we get people connected to wellness resources, right? So that is the vision around platform transformation in medicine. Interestingly, I think Mayo Clinic has been a forerunner in this, but there's others now that are coming along too. And it was very interesting conference, because the conference had a lot of different sorts of participants, and some were, of course, on the diagnostic side. I was on a couple of panels myself there. So,
Well, that's a really great description, and I like the way you laid it out. And of course, this has an impact, it has implications for laboratory medicine and pathology as well. I don't know if you
oh,
want to touch on that.
absolutely. Well, I would say the first thing though that we have to kind of get through, and this I'm just speaking completely in my own bias. When someone talks about Amazon as a perfect example of platform, or Uber is another one that people use,
Hmm.
you tend to think of something that's very commodity driven, right? So that's where sometimes we get confused in healthcare to say, um, you know, well, I don't, Amazon's trying to get into healthcare. Others are too, and you and I've talked about this. They're struggling, right? Because people have different expectations around healthcare. It's extraordinarily personal. It's like it's not something. Boy, I really want to access to a commodity. I want to be seen as a commodity, right? So we step back and say, well, what does that mean? Yeah, I think diagnostics is a great example where you say it's not about commoditization. It's around access across a continuum, right? One of the things that we see with diagnostics costs, for instance, in my neck of the woods, and now it's coming with molecular or with microbiology too. During my career, when I started in 2000, most of the tests were relatively straightforward. Most of them were not terribly expensive. But over time, we've seen the introductions of things like mass spec, which may or may not be expensive. NGS sequencing, which is almost always next generation sequencing, high intensity sorts of diagnostics that are also very expensive. And so the question is, how do we use those most effectively? So you start to think about, how do we put those into an ecosystem that helps a patient and a provider know when they need that type of test versus when they need something that's more straightforward in a diagnostic, or when there's something that's more widely available, and how can we get them connected to that? So I think that's an area which, just thinking broadly, I think one of the first areas we'll start to see this really break into laboratory medicine and pathology actually is in pathology. So it's, one of the problems that we have in pathology worldwide is that the demand for tissue review continues to go up, and the number of pathologists that are trained and graduating globally continues to be static or go down, which means we have a now much more demand than supply, which is bad for patients, right? Because that means you're waiting for someone to look at your case, and you're waiting for someone, particularly if it's complex. So you start to think of digital pathology. Can it move us to not just helping us be more efficient in our own practice every day by having digital images, but allow us to put in tools, right? To say, my gosh, this is a case that looks like a high complexity case. I know Dr. Smith at Harvard, or Dr. Pritt at Mayo Clinic has written about these cases. Can we direct that case to that person? It's just a whole new way. So I think we'll start to see this in pathology and in lab medicine. Or conversely, think about the other end of the spectrum, COVID. We really struggled with COVID. Of course, for a while, there just weren't enough tests, period. But very early on, it was just getting the tests to the places where there actually was capacity to perform it, right? And so you start to think about, what if when I went in for my nasal swab, that laboratory was part of a network to say, yes, we have plenty of capacity today, we're going to run it right here, or no, we don't, but we know these 4 other laboratories have the ability to run the test for Bill before he goes on his trip, and therefore we'll get it run. So it's those sorts of things that I think will start to come into play, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does, absolutely. And I think with anatomic pathology, if you have digitalized slides, that's going to facilitate it, because a specimen which has been digitalized could then be easily transferred to the expert in Harvard or at Mayo Clinic, and it wouldn't necessarily require physical mailing of slides and blocks.
Yes, exactly. And I think I agree. And the other thing, as laboratorians, and not just pathologists, for what we've described, is it gives us the ability to start to systematize our knowledge, right? Meaning that, yes, it'd be great to send that case to Dr. Pritt, and we will send that case to Dr. Pritt. But Dr. Pritt is also working to say, these are the ways I think about, these are the things I look for in a case, these are the things I look for up front in the clinical history. If we're in a digital environment, some of that vetting can happen. So when it can say, wait a second, maybe this doesn't have to go to Dr. Pritt. Or when it gets to you, all those boxes are checked. So you're not now having to look for all those things. So that's, to me, the beauty of having worked at a place like Mayo Clinic, where I get the privilege to work with people like you. The challenge is we want as many people as possible to get access to what we know so we can help with their healthcare. But that model of just trying to look at something, trying to run something, it's inherently going to have a cap that if you start to go to a platform model, you could start to say, where do cases interact with you? When should they not? When can they go to somebody else? And I would say it was very visionary of Dr. Fruja, because you need someplace like Mayo Clinic to take a big role in that, because patients want to have trust. If they're going to let go of that, because the reality is, the flip side of that is, I go to my doctor because I trust my doctor. People come to Mayo Clinic all the time because they trust Mayo Clinic. So if it's out there in this environment where it's moving around, how do I know I can trust it? Well, they're going to trust the people that are designing those systems that will support their care. And that's where I think it's incumbent on us in laboratory medicine to be a big part of that.
I agree completely. We want to be a part of this. We want to be able to design how the data are going to be used, how the systems are going to be used. I think it's really exciting. It's an exciting time, and it will help us because, as we talked about, the pathology pipeline to get adequate pathologists is struggling a bit. We need more people to go into pathology and laboratory medicine, but it's a problem worldwide. Shortages of pathologists, laboratory technologists, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% on both of those. And I would say it's not just, again, to think about other areas of laboratory medicine where it's going to be really critically important. I think about micro testing, where you and I talked about one of the things we saw with COVID. There was no system in place to say that would allow an at-home diagnostic to get into a system to say what you need to do with it. When is a more complex test needed? It gives us all the ability to really hopefully scale what we do in a way that makes it more accessible and affordable for patients and makes our profession sustainable as well. So, and I can tell you that others are thinking this way, other diagnostic manufacturers and others. So it's an exciting time, but like our current theme, it's also a time to really be engaged, because it's going to move quickly.
Yes.
That was the other interesting thing when I was out at this platform conference. There was a session about people that are investing in businesses based on large language models. And they talked about how the challenge is these things are getting improved so quickly, right? I mean, you almost have to have flexibility to say this large language model could well be improved in 4 months significantly, right? And these things are all happening. We have to stay engaged with them. So most importantly, we can keep the needs of our patients at the center of all these things that are happening.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And as they change, if they're involved in diagnostics, then it's up to us to ensure that the new system, the new change is appropriately validated so that we know it's still appropriate for patient care. And how do you continue to validate a system that continues to evolve?
Yeah, excellent
So
point.
again,
And
being at the table and being part of this is important.
I agree. I mean, last quote that I've heard a couple times now, and I think it really rings true, is, people worry that these tools will replace our jobs, and I don't think they will, because the need is so high, and some of the other things you and I just talked about. But what will happen over time is that the people that use the tools will be the ones that are. So I know with your passion for education, we really have to be thinking about that as well, right?
Yes.
How do we educate current practitioners? How do we educate future practitioners to have the skill sets they need for this new world?
Yes, the aphorism is pathologists. AI will not replace pathologists, but pathologists who use AI will replace those who don't.
Yep.
And you can insert physician, laboratory scientist. Basically, it's going to be people that can use these tools effectively that are going to be able to move forward and make all these great improvements to deliver care.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Belle. I appreciate the update. Exciting stuff, and we'll keep an eye on that going forward.
Sounds great. Just one more thing for us to talk about.
Absolutely. Add it to the list. All right. Until next time, take care.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and don't forget to tune in every Thursday and every other Tuesday.